In the heart of a bustling city where steel towers kissed the sky and the constant hum of traffic created an urban symphony, Sam Turner navigated his way through another predictable Tuesday. At 34, he had settled into the comfortable routine of his position as a senior teller at First National Bank, where the smell of fresh printer paper and the soft clicking of keyboards had become the soundtrack to his days. The bank's marble floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting, casting everything in a sterile, corporate glow that seemed to drain the color from even the most vibrant personalities. Sam's cubicle was a testament to his methodical nature. Organized stacks of loan applications, a small succulent plant that somehow thrived under artificial light, and a framed photo of his late parents from their anniversary dinner 5 years ago. He was driven by dreams of financial security that went beyond mere survival, envisioning a future where his carefully accumulated savings would blossom into the kind of prosperity that would allow him to quit this soul-crushing job and perhaps open the small bookstore he'd always fantasized about. The break room on the third floor was a study in corporate minimalism. White walls adorned with motivational posters featuring soaring eagles and mountain peaks, accompanied by phrases like "teamwork makes the dream work." The fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting a pale light over the collection of mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that had seen better days. Sam sat alone at a small round table, stirring artificial creamer into what could generously be called coffee but tasted more like bitter water with delusions of grandeur. It was precisely 2:47 p.m. when his phone buzzed against the laminate table surface. The caller ID showed only numbers, no name, no company. Something about the timing felt deliberate, as if someone had been watching his routine, waiting for this exact moment of vulnerability. "Hello, this is Greg, an investment broker with something extraordinary to share," came the voice through the speaker. It was smooth as silk, with just a hint of a southern accent that suggested trustworthiness and old money sophistication. Greg's words flowed like honey, each syllable carefully crafted to inspire confidence. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, Sam. I've been reviewing some financial profiles, and your name came up as someone who might be interested in an opportunity that's quite literally changing lives." Before Sam could even ask how Greg had obtained his personal information, he found himself entranced by tales of lucrative returns on investments through a platform called DLXmarkets. Greg painted vivid pictures of ordinary people, teachers, mechanics, nurses, who had transformed their modest savings into six-figure portfolios within months. He spoke of proprietary algorithms, insider knowledge, and market opportunities that traditional banks simply couldn't access. "The minimum investment is only $5,000, Greg explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But between you and me, Sam, those who invest their full savings, those are the ones seeing returns of 300% in the first year alone. I'm talking about turning your $50,000 into $200,000, maybe more." The allure was undeniable. Greg seemed to know exactly what buttons to push, mentioning Sam's long hours at the bank, his modest apartment, the dreams that seemed perpetually just out of reach. With assurances of wealth beyond his imagination and testimonials from supposedly satisfied investors, Sam felt the familiar tug of hope that had been dormant for too long. The call lasted 47 minutes, during which Greg masterfully addressed every concern, countered every hesitation, and painted a future so compelling that Sam's rational mind seemed to simply shut down. By the time he hung up, Sam had agreed to wire his entire savings, $52,000 accumulated over 8 years of careful budgeting and sacrifice, to an account Greg provided. The transfer would happen the next morning. In the beginning, it was pure bliss. The DLXmarkets platform was sleek and professional, with real-time charts that showed Sam's investment growing by hundreds of dollars each day. Monthly updates arrived like clockwork, each email more encouraging than the last. The numbers climbed steadily. $52,000 became $61,000 in the first month, then $74,000 by the second. Sam found himself checking the platform multiple times a day, watching his digital fortune grow with the same fascination others might reserve for watching their children take first steps. He began to change his routines, his entire outlook on life shifting with each positive update. During lunch breaks, instead of eating his usual sad desk sandwich, he started venturing to nicer restaurants, justifying the expense by calculating what percentage of his growing wealth each meal represented. He researched luxury cars online, bookmarking a silver BMW that would cost roughly what he used to make in an entire year. He dreamed of surprising his sister with a family vacation to Europe, imagining the look on her face when he casually mentioned he'd be paying for everyone's flights and accommodations. The break room conversations took on a different tone as well. Sam found himself subtly dropping hints about his investment success, watching colleagues' faces shift from polite interest to poorly concealed envy. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was ahead of the game, like he had figured out something that others were too cautious or too uninformed to grasp. However, as autumn crept into winter and the weeks turned into months, unease began to creep in like a shadow at dusk. It started small, a delayed response to an email inquiry about withdrawal procedures, a phone number that went straight to voicemail when he tried to reach Greg directly. Then friends who had also ventured into the world of DLXmarkets, people Sam had enthusiastically referred after his own initial success, began to grow anxious. Marcus, a college buddy who worked in accounting, was the first to voice concerns. They met at O'Malley's bar on a Thursday night, the kind of dimly lit establishment where serious conversations happened over amber liquid courage. Marcus's usually confident demeanor had been replaced by something Sam had never seen before, genuine fear. "I can't get anyone on the phone," Marcus confided, his voice barely audible over the sounds of clinking glasses and muted conversation. "Every number goes to voicemail. The live chat feature on the website disappeared last week. And when I tried to process a small withdrawal, just $2,000 to test the waters, the request has been pending for 16 days. Julie Chun, Sam's former cubicle neighbor who had invested her mother's life insurance money based on Sam's glowing recommendation, sent increasingly frantic text messages. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and Julie needed to access funds for specialized care that insurance wouldn't cover. Every day that passed without access to her investment was another day her mother went without proper treatment. Sam's instincts, which had been dormant during those intoxicating months of apparent success, suddenly flared to life like a smoke detector in a burning building. The sense of foreboding was physical, a knot in his stomach that grew tighter with each passing day, a cold sweat that would wake him at 3 a.m., his heart racing with nameless dread. Late one particularly restless night, illuminated only by the blue glow of his laptop screen, Sam bombarded search engines with increasingly desperate queries about DLXmarkets. What he found made his blood run cold. Forums filled with similar stories, promises of wealth that evaporated like morning mist, testimonials that used stock photos and fabricated names, regulatory warnings from financial authorities in 3 different countries. He discovered that the impressive office address listed on DLXmarkets' website was actually a UPS store in a strip mall. The supposed team of expert traders featured on their About Us page were models whose photos had been purchased from a stock photography site. Reviews that had once seemed genuine now revealed themselves as carefully crafted fiction, all posted within the same 2-week period by accounts with no other activity. His heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, Sam realized the devastating truth. DLXmarkets was not just a bad investment or even a poorly managed fund. It was a sophisticated mirage, a scam designed to swindle hard-earned savings from people exactly like him. People who worked honest jobs, saved responsibly, and dared to dream of something better. The next morning, Sam took his first sick day in 3 years and drove straight to the downtown police precinct. The building was a fortress of gray concrete and tinted windows, designed more for intimidation than comfort. Inside, the waiting area smelled of industrial disinfectant and disappointment. After 2 hours of waiting, Sam was finally ushered into a small room where Detective Maria Rodriguez listened to his story with the kind of professional patience that suggested she'd heard variations of it countless times before. "Mr. Turner," she said, consulting her notes, "I understand your frustration, but financial fraud cases like this are incredibly complex. Without evidence of criminal activity on U.S. soil, without a physical location for this Greg person, without even his real name, there's very little we can do. These operations are typically run from overseas, moving money through multiple jurisdictions specifically to avoid prosecution." She slid a business card across the table. "File a complaint with the FTC and the SEC. Maybe contact your bank about potential chargeback options, though after this much time, that's unlikely to help. I'm sorry, but cases like this rarely result in recovery of funds." Detective Rodriguez's words hit Sam like physical blows. The bureaucratic indifference wasn't personal, she genuinely seemed to care. But the system was simply not equipped to deal with cases like these. As he walked out of the precinct into the harsh afternoon sunlight, Sam felt more helpless than ever, carrying the crushing weight of not just his own financial ruin, but the knowledge that he had led others into the same trap. Just as despair threatened to swallow him whole, a memory surfaced. Sarah Mitchell, an old friend from college who had always been resourceful, the kind of person who seemed to know someone who knew someone in every conceivable situation. They had lost touch after graduation, but Sam remembered her working for some kind of financial consulting firm that specialized in unusual cases. He found her through LinkedIn, and to his surprise, she agreed to meet him that same evening. They chose Café Luna, a quaint establishment in the arts district that Sam had never noticed before. It was the kind of place where mismatched furniture somehow created a cohesive aesthetic, where the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans mixed with the scent of handmade pastries, and where conversations could happen without the fear of being overheard by corporate colleagues or nosy neighbors. Sarah had changed since college. Her once casual style had evolved into something more polished, more purposeful. She wore a charcoal blazer over dark jeans, and her eyes held a sharpness that suggested she'd seen more of the world's darker corners than most people their age. She listened intently as Sam divulged his entire plight, taking notes in a leather-bound journal and asking pointed questions that revealed a sophisticated understanding of financial fraud. "You might consider a Cambuji," she suggested, her eyes twinkling with the kind of determination Sam hadn't seen since their college days when she'd single-handedly organized a campaign to get better lighting installed on the campus after a series of assaults. "It's a whistleblowing provision that could help expose Greg and potentially recover your funds." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the ambient noise of the cafe. The Cambuji provision allows the first individual to report someone involved in fraud to not only escape prosecution, but also receive a portion of the funds recovered following a successful conviction of the perpetrators of the fraud. It's based on similar concepts used in corporate whistleblowing cases, but adapted for financial crimes. She paused, stirring her cappuccino thoughtfully. An additional mechanism must be established to ensure that individuals who share information receive a portion of the recovered funds and are protected from prosecution for any inadvertent participation in the scheme. This could be implemented through what we call a blood pact or a security document, essentially a legally binding agreement that protects the whistleblower while ensuring their cooperation. The term sounded almost mythical, like something from a different world entirely. Sarah explained that she had connections with an organization called the Order of St. Nicholas. Not a religious group, despite the name, but a clandestine network of former law enforcement officers, financial investigators, and reformed white-collar criminals who specialized in uncovering fraud that traditional authorities couldn't or wouldn't pursue. "They operate in the gray areas," Sarah explained, her voice taking on a cautionary tone. "They use methods that wouldn't hold up in traditional court proceedings, but they get results. They've recovered millions for people in situations exactly like yours. The catch is that once you're in, you're committed. They don't take cases lightly, and they expect complete honesty and cooperation." The thought of engaging with an underground organization intrigued, yet terrified Sam. Everything about his life had been conventional, safe, predictable. Now he was contemplating entering a world that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal, moral and expedient. But as he thought about Marcus's haunted expression, about Julie Chen's desperate text messages, about the $52,000 that represented 8 years of his life, the choice became clear. With reluctance born of desperation rather than confidence, Sam agreed to seek their assistance. The initial meeting with the order took place 3 days later in the basement of what appeared to be an abandoned bookstore in the warehouse district. Sam arrived at the specified time, 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, to find the front door unlocked despite the closed sign and boarded windows. Following Sarah's instructions, he made his way through rows of dusty shelves to a door marked staff only. The basement was a study in organized chaos. Multiple computer screens cast blue light across faces Sam couldn't quite make out in the darkness. The air smelled of cigarettes, strong coffee, and the particular mustiness that comes from spending too much time underground. 3 people sat around a conference table that looked like it had been salvaged from a corporate bankruptcy sale. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and the bearing of a former federal agent, a younger man whose fingers never stopped moving across a laptop keyboard, and someone Sam couldn't see clearly who remained in the shadows throughout the entire meeting. The woman, who introduced herself only as Emma, listened to Sam's story with the same professional attention as Detective Rodriguez, but with one crucial difference. She took notes, asked follow-up questions, and most importantly, she didn't dismiss his case as hopeless. Larry Morrison, that's his real name, by the way, has been running variations of this scam for 7 years, Emma explained, sliding a manila folder across the table. He's incorporated companies in Delaware, Nevada, and the Cayman Islands. He's got bank accounts in at least 4 countries. He's good at what he does, which is why traditional law enforcement can't touch him. The folder contained photographs, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. Larry's real face looked different from the professional headshot on the DLXmarkets website. Harder, older, with the kind of eyes that suggested he'd crossed moral lines so many times he'd forgotten they ever existed. Emma continued, "We've been tracking his operation for 18 months. We know how he recruits victims, how he moves money, even which coffee shop he frequents in Belize where he's currently hiding out. What we need is someone on the inside, someone who can provide evidence of his direct involvement in the fraud." The younger man, introduced as Tech, finally looked up from his laptop. "We've identified someone in Morrison's organization who might be willing to cooperate. A woman named Elena Vasquez who handles customer communications. She's been expressing doubts about the operation, particularly after Morrison started targeting elderly victims. We think she could be turned." They meticulously drafted the Cambodia Agreement and the Blood Pact, documents that looked more like artifacts from another century than modern legal instruments. The Blood Pact, despite its ominous name, was actually a comprehensive protection agreement that bound the order into a solemn commitment to protect the whistleblower from legal repercussions, ensure their anonymity, and guarantee their share of any recovered funds. "This isn't a game," Emma warned as Sam prepared to sign the documents. "Once Elena agrees to cooperate, Morrison's entire operation will begin to unravel. That means he'll become dangerous in ways that go beyond financial fraud. People who steal this much money don't give up easily, and they don't forgive betrayal." Time passed with agonizing slowness. Days blended into weeks as Sam tried to maintain his normal routine while knowing that somewhere, in ways he couldn't fully comprehend, a complex operation was unfolding. He continued going to work, processing loan applications and helping customers with their banking needs. But every phone call, every email notification, every knock on his apartment door sent his heart racing. The waiting was perhaps the hardest part. Sam found himself unable to concentrate on simple tasks, starting conversations and losing track of what he was saying mid-sentence. He lost weight without trying, developed a nervous habit of checking his phone every few minutes, and began experiencing the kind of insomnia that no amount of over-the-counter sleep aids could cure. Then one evening, as he lay in bed watching the shadows on his ceiling morph into monsters of doubt and despair, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. The message was brief and to the point. "Sam, it's Elena. I have what you need. Meet me at the park tomorrow, 3 p.m. Wear a red hat." The next day, the sun was a stark contrast to the coldness in Sam's stomach as he approached the park bench where Elena had instructed him to be. He found her sitting with a plain black bag at her feet, looking nervously around as if expecting someone to jump out of the bushes at any moment. She was younger than he had pictured, mid-20s with auburn hair tied in a messy bun and eyes that held the weight of secrets she hadn't wanted to keep. "You must be Sam," she whispered when she saw him, her voice quivering. She was dressed in a nondescript outfit that made her blend into the crowd, beige slacks, a blue blouse, and sensible shoes that suggested she'd chosen practicality over fashion. She handed him the bag. "Inside is everything you need to take Larry down. I couldn't stand watching him ruin more lives." The bag contained USB drives filled with incriminating emails, financial statements that linked Larry to the various shell companies, and a detailed list of his accomplices. Sam's heart raced as he sifted through the documents, the words on the pages like a siren's call to justice. Elena's voice grew softer as she spoke, her eyes welling up with tears. "I've been with them for 3 years," she confessed. "I started as an intern, and at first, I thought it was all legitimate. But then I saw how they manipulated people, how they preyed on their hopes and fears. And when I tried to leave, they said they had compromising information on me. I was trapped." Her story hit Sam like a sledgehammer, and suddenly the coldness in his stomach was replaced with a burning anger. He'd seen the aftermath of their greed in the faces of his friends, in the desperate texts from people like Julie Chun. Now he had a chance to fight back, armed with the very evidence they had used to build their house of cards. The handoff was quick and silent, just the rustling of paper and the clink of plastic as the USBs were transferred. No goodbyes, no promises of a brighter future, just the unspoken understanding that their fates were now intertwined in a dance of deceit and retribution. As Elena disappeared into the throng of people, Sam felt the weight of his decision settle heavily on his shoulders. He had stepped into a world that didn't care about the rules he'd played by for so long. A world where the lines between right and wrong were drawn in shades of gray. Yet, with each step away from that bench, the knot in his stomach loosened just a bit. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. The Order of St. Nicholas wasted no time. Within hours, they had verified the authenticity of the evidence and set into motion a plan that was as intricate as the scam itself. Sam was instructed to maintain his normal life while they worked behind the scenes. The next day after the handoff, Sam found himself back in the sterile, uncomfortable environment of the police precinct, this time with Detective Rodriguez looking at him with a glimmer of respect. The evidence he brought with him was laid out on her desk, a stark contrast to their first meeting, where his hope had been met with a heavy dose of reality. This is significant, Mr. Turner, she said, her eyes scanning the documents with a newfound urgency. If we can tie this back to Morrison, we might just have a case. Mr. Turner, she said, shaking her head, I have to admit, when you first came in here, I thought this was just another case we'd have to file away unsolved. But whoever you've been working with, they've handed us the most complete financial fraud case I've seen in 20 years of police work. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings with federal agents, endless hours of questioning, and the slow, meticulous process of building a case that could stand up in court. Sam's life was no longer his own. It was a series of appointments, background checks, and late-night phone calls with a team that operated outside the bounds of traditional law enforcement. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew so thick it was palpable. Every time his phone rang, he expected it to be news of their victory, or of Larry finding out. The fear was a constant companion, but so was the anticipation of finally seeing justice served. And then one morning, it all came to a head. A breaking news alert on his phone sent his heart racing. International investment scheme exposed. FBI arrests key players in multimillion-dollar fraud. Sam's hand shook as he clicked the link, his eyes scanning the article for the name he knew all too well, Larry Morrison. The picture of the man in handcuffs was a stark reminder of the power of truth in the face of deception. Federal agents had simultaneously raided locations in Miami, Las Vegas, and Georgetown, Cayman Islands. 17 people had been arrested in connection with what authorities were calling one of the largest international investment fraud schemes in recent history. The estimated victim losses exceeded $40 million. The following weeks were a blur of FBI interrogations, court dates, and the slow, painful process of piecing together what had been stolen. Yet, amidst the chaos, Sam felt a sense of vindication. He had taken a stand, and it had paid off. The order remained in the shadows, working tirelessly to recover as much of the stolen funds as possible. Every time he saw a notification of progress in his inbox, a piece of his soul felt restored. The bookstore dream didn't seem so out of reach anymore. But it was the final email from Sarah that brought the reality home. The order had secured a large portion of the stolen money, and it was being returned to the victims. Sam's $52,000 was on its way back to him. Less the order's fee, of course, but the number was so significant it didn't matter. The recovery process took another 8 months, but it was thorough and systematic. But the financial recovery, while crucial, wasn't the most important outcome. Marcus got his money back and used part of it to start the consulting business he'd always dreamed of. Julie Chin was able to place her mother in a specialized care facility where she received the kind of attention that allowed her to maintain her dignity and independence far longer than anyone had expected. Through this harrowing journey, Sam unearthed truths far more valuable than monetary gains. He learned that perseverance and resilience weren't just abstract concepts, but actual skills that could be developed and applied when life presented its most difficult challenges. He discovered that justice, while often slow and sometimes requiring unconventional approaches, was still possible for ordinary people willing to fight for it. Standing on his apartment balcony one evening in late October, watching the sun set over the city skyline, he'd observed thousands of times before. Sam realized that although life was indeed fraught with deception, the echoes of honesty and bravery resonated louder and traveled farther than the lies that had temporarily derailed his dreams. The experience had changed him in ways that went beyond the balance in his bank account. He had learned to trust his instincts, to ask difficult questions, and to understand that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in courtrooms or police stations, but in the quiet moments when a person decided whether to give up or keep fighting. The city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one representing someone else's dreams, struggles, and hopes for brighter tomorrows. Sam smiled, knowing his own tomorrow would indeed be brighter, not just because of the money he'd recovered, but because of the person he'd become in the process of fighting for it.